The desert moon was low when Evan Holt smelled the fire. It was not a normal campfire smell. It was heavy, greasy, mixed with strange spices and burning flesh. Evan slowed his steps and pulled his scarf tighter around his face as he walked near the rocky ridge overlooking the Krell hunting camp. He was not supposed to be here. Evan was a human contract worker, nothing more. His job was to guard cargo, follow orders, and most importantly stay invisible. Humans were tolerated on Krell land, not welcomed. The Krell were a warrior species, proud, harsh. They respected strength and cruelty far more than kindness. Evan had learned that lesson the hard way. So when he heard the sound, he told himself to ignore it. A small sound, high, broken, a whimper. He stopped walking. His boots sank slightly into the sand as he turned his head toward the camp. The Krell warriors were celebrating. He could hear their deep laughter and the clatter of metal weapons. Large shapes moved around glowing fire pits. The whimper came again. Evan's chest tightened. He moved closer, staying low, using the rocks for cover. He told himself it was curiosity. He told himself it was none of his business. But his feet kept moving anyway. Then he saw the pit. It was wide and made of dark metal sunk into the ground. Red light glowed from inside it. Heat rolled out in waves. The fire had just been lit, not roaring yet, but strong enough to burn. Inside the pit were 6 small shapes. Evan froze. They were alien puppies, not monsters. Not weapons. Just babies. Their bodies were small and round, covered in soft blue skin with faint markings. Their ears were too large, folded and shaking. Their eyes were big, dark, and filled with terror. Glowing fiber ropes tied them together at the necks and legs so they could barely move. One of them slipped and cried out, a thin, weak sound that cut straight through Evan's chest. "Oh no," he whispered. These were Krell hunting beasts. He knew that. Every human on this planet knew the stories. When grown, these creatures were deadly, fast, loyal only to their masters. Used in war and hunts, but these ones? They could barely stand. The fire crackled beneath them. Smoke rose, stinging Evan's eyes. One puppy had already burned the tips of its paws, trying to move away from the heat. Evan's heart started pounding hard. He looked around. Krell warriors stood nearby, watching the fire, drinking, laughing. To them, this was food. A ritual, justice. Evan felt sick. A shadow fell over him. "You look lost, human." Evan turned slowly. Chief Braxthul stood behind him, tall and broad, his armored body glowing in the firelight. His eyes were cold and sharp. Spears and blades hung from his back. Ivan swallowed. "I was just passing through." Braxthul followed Evan's gaze to the pit and made a clicking sound that might have been laughter. "You see our feast," the chief said. Evan's mouth felt dry. They're just babies." "Yes," Braxthul replied calmly. "Their meat is best young." Evan clenched his fists. "They don't deserve this." The chief slowly turned his head back to him. The air felt heavy. "Deserve?" Braxthul said. "These beasts killed one of my scouts." Evan shook his head. "Their mother did. Not them. You already killed her." Silence spread across the camp. The laughter stopped. Several Krell warriors turned to look at Evan now. Braxthul stepped closer. Evan could feel the heat of the chief's body, smell the metal and blood on his armor. "You speak boldly for a soft creature," the chief said. "Do humans cry for animals?" Evan looked back at the pit. One puppy locked eyes with him and let out a weak cry, as if it knew. "Yes," Evan said quietly. "We do." The chief studied him for a long moment. Then his mouth curved in a slow, cruel smile. "Very well," Braxthul said. "Prove it." He pointed one massive claw toward the fire. "Take them out," the chief said. "With your bare hand." The fire crackled louder. The puppies cried. And Evan knew that whatever happened next would change everything. Evan froze. The chief's words hung in the air like a weight. Take them out. With your bare hand. His heart raced. His mind screamed at him to run, to leave, to save himself. Humans were not warriors here. Humans were fragile, small, soft. One wrong move, and the Krell would kill him without a second thought. He looked down at the pit. The fire licked the edges of the puppies' glowing ropes. Smoke twisted around their tiny bodies, making them cough and shiver. Their eyes, wide and terrified, searched for something, anything that could help them. They had found it in him. Evan felt it deep in his chest, a fierce heat he had never known before. This is insane, he whispered to himself. But the word insane felt weak against the pounding of his heart. The Krell chief, Brax Thul, leaned closer. His mandibles clicked, a sound like metal scraping stone. Do you hesitate, human? The fire waits for no one. Your choice is simple, save them, or let them die. Evan's mind spun. Every instinct in his body screamed to run. But another part of him, a small stubborn spark, burned brighter. He had seen cruelty. He had seen death. But he had never turned away when something innocent was in danger. These puppies had no chance if he did nothing. He knelt at the edge of the pit. The heat rolled over his face. He could feel the sting of the flames on his skin even before touching the metal. The ropes that bound the puppies began to smoke, curling in on themselves like black vines. Evan swallowed hard. His hands shook as he reached toward the pit. The chief's gaze never left him. Do you fear pain, human? I fear. Nothing more than letting them burn, Evan said, voice trembling but firm. The Krell laughed softly. It was not a kind laugh. It was a sound that belonged to creatures who had never known mercy. The warriors stepped back, curious to see what this human would do. None of them had ever seen one risk so much. The first puppy cried, tiny and weak, and shivered under the heat. Evan froze for a heartbeat, then closed his eyes and plunged his hands into the fire pit. The heat hit him like a wall. Pain shot through his arm, sharp and white-hot. He gasped and almost pulled back, but the sight of the trembling puppies stopped him. One paw had already touched the flame, leaving a black mark on the soft blue skin. Evan bit his lip. He felt the metal scorching through the ropes. The puppies twisted and cried, trying to wriggle free, but the ropes held tight. Come on, he whispered. Almost there. I've got you. The chief leaned down closer, and his voice rumbled like distant thunder. Your flesh will burn, human. Are you ready to lose a part of yourself? Evan clenched his teeth. If it saves them, yes. Pain exploded as his fingers brushed against the hot rope. Smoke filled his nostrils. His skin sizzled. Every nerve in his arm screamed at him to stop. But he gritted his teeth and held on tighter. The puppies pressed against him instinctively. As if they knew he was their only hope, time slowed. The warriors watched silently. Even Brax Thul, whose eyes had always held cruelty, seemed momentarily still. Evan's mind went blank except for the little whimpers around him. His body ached. Fire burned him. Every fiber of his being screamed to let go. But he didn't. He wouldn't. He pulled hard with everything he had. The ropes resisted, sizzling and tight, but they began to give. One by one, the puppies slipped free from the fire. Evan collapsed backward onto the sand, panting, sweat and smoke covering him. The puppies scrambled over him, shaking and crying, and he wrapped them in his arms. Brax Thul stepped forward. His massive shadow fell over the human and the rescued puppies. You choose to save creatures that are not your kind, he said slowly. His voice was calm, but every word carried weight. Evan's chest heaved. They're alive, he whispered. That's all that matters. The chief clicked his mandibles in a sound that was almost thoughtful. Around them, the camp was silent. Even the warriors seemed unsure how to respond to a human who would risk fire, pain, and possibly his life to save something so small. Evan's arm burned and blistered, but he did not care. The puppies pressed close to him, shaking but alive. Their tiny bodies warmed him in a way he had not expected. And in that moment, even in the heart of enemy land, Evan knew something powerful. Sometimes courage was not about strength. It was about choosing to protect the helpless. Even when the world told you to turn away, the chief looked down at him. And for the first time, Evan saw something like respect in his cold, alien eyes. The fire still crackled. The smoke still rose. But for now, the puppies were safe, and Evan Holt had made a choice that the Krell would never forget. Evan's body ached. Every muscle screamed. His arm felt like it was on fire from fingertip to elbow, yet he refused to let go of the small, trembling creatures in his grasp. The smoke stung his eyes, his lungs burned, and his skin blistered from the heat of the pit. Pain, raw and relentless, radiated through him. But above it all, a stronger force held him steady, the instinct to save those innocent lives. The puppies squirmed and whimpered. Tiny bodies pressed against his chest, trying to escape the heat that was already licking at their fur-like skin. One puppy, braver than the others, nudged its head toward him, looking up with wide, fearful eyes. Evan whispered softly, almost pleading with himself as much as with them, "Hold on. I've got you. Just a little longer." Behind him, the Krell warriors watched. Their mandibles clicked, not in amusement this time, but in disbelief. Even the chief, Brax Thul, whose cruelty had shaped Ivan's fear, stood motionless. He had seen many acts of bravery in his lifetime, but none like this. A human risking flesh and blood for creatures so small, creatures that were nothing in Krell eyes, was something strange, something foreign, something worth noticing. Evan dug his fingers into the burning rope tying the puppies together. It hissed and smoked, cutting into his palm, but he didn't release it. His arm shook violently under the strain and the heat, but his will was iron. The thought of leaving the puppies to die was unbearable. The smell of smoke, burned flesh, and fear filled his senses, but all he could focus on was the fragile life in his hands. The fire beneath them roared higher now, dancing along the edges of the metal pit. Heat licked at Evan's face, and his sweat turned to steam on his skin. He could feel the raw burn spreading up his arm, yet he did not stop. One by one, the rope started to give under his desperate strength. A tear ran down his cheek, not from the pain, but from the fear of failing them. Suddenly, a spark of movement. One puppy struggled furiously, trying to free itself, almost slipping from his grasp. Evan tightened his hold, ignoring the searing pain in his hands. "Don't you dare," he whispered, his voice hoarse, cracking. "I will not let you die. Not like this. Not today." The chief's deep voice broke the tense silence. "Do you think pain matters, human? You will burn. You will bleed. And yet you choose this?" Evan's chest heaved. "Pain is nothing compared to their lives," he said, his voice trembling but defiant. "I can bear it. They cannot." For the first time, the warriors shifted uneasily. Humans were weak, yes, but they had never seen one face death for something so small, so insignificant in the eyes of the mighty Krell. Evan's determination radiated like a beacon. And in that moment, even the aliens felt the weight of his courage. With one final, desperate heave, Evan yanked the ropes from the pit. Sparks flew. The metal rims seared his arm. Pain exploded in white-hot streaks up his nerves. He cried out, a raw, primal scream of agony. But when he fell backward onto the sand, clutching the puppies to his chest, he smiled through the tears and smoke. They were free. The puppies trembled in his arms, whining softly, licking his burned skin instinctively. They pressed their tiny bodies against his chest, seeking warmth and comfort. Evan could feel their fragile hearts beating against his own. For a moment, the fire seemed distant, almost meaningless. All that mattered was that they were alive. Braxthul stepped forward, towering over the human and the rescued creatures. His mandibles clicked in a slow, deliberate rhythm. "You risked yourself for creatures that are not your kind," he said. His voice was low, almost thoughtful. "You place value on life where none is required. Curious." Evan coughed, smoke burning his lungs, sweat and ash covering his face. "They deserve to live," he whispered. "That's all that matters." The chief's eyes, cold and calculating, held him for a long moment. Then he gestured to his warriors. "Let them live," Braxthul commanded. "This human has shown strength beyond expectation. Perhaps there is more to humans than we believed." The warriors murmured among themselves, astonishment clear in their clicks and low growls. A human had risked fire, flesh and blood to save what they had considered nothing more than prey. And somehow, it had worked. Evan's arm was burning, blistered, and useless, but he did not care. He held the puppies close, feeling the soft warmth of life against his chest, and for the first time in that harsh alien land, he felt a quiet, unshakable triumph. The fire still crackled. The smoke still rose. But for now, in the desert moonlight, the little blue creatures were alive. And a human had shown the Krell something they had never seen before, a courage born not from strength, but from compassion. And in the eyes of Braxthul, the cruel Krell chief, a flicker of respect began to form. The kind that lasts a lifetime. Evan collapsed onto the hot sand, gasping. Smoke burned his lungs and stung his eyes, and the pain in his arm was unbearable. Every nerve screamed as if it were being torn apart. Yet, even through the agony, he held the puppies close, pressing them to his chest. Their tiny bodies trembled against him, weak but alive. For a moment, he forgot the fire, the Krell, the danger. All that mattered was that he had saved them. The puppies whimpered softly, licking his burned skin instinctively. One of them crawled onto his shoulder, nestling against his neck, trusting him entirely. Evan felt a strange warmth despite the pain. The creatures were alive, and that simple truth filled him with a strange, fierce pride. His fingers were blackened, blistered, barely moving. But he did not care. Braxthul approached slowly, the shadow of his massive form falling over Evan. The Krell chief's mandibles clicked in an unfamiliar rhythm, something like curiosity, maybe even surprise. Around them, the camp was silent. The warriors, usually loud and ruthless, watched the human cradling the alien puppies without mockery, without laughter. They had never seen a human act like this. A human defy fire, pain, and threat of death for something so small. So insignificant in their eyes, "You would lose a limb," Braxthul said. His deep voice calm but heavy, "For creatures that are not your kind." Evan's chest heaved. Smoke and sweat clung to his hair and face. "They're alive," he whispered hoarsely. "That's enough." For a long moment, the chief simply observed him. Then he clicked his mandibles again, slowly, thoughtfully. "The hunt is over," he declared. "These beings will live." Relief washed over Evan, almost making him dizzy. He tried to smile but could only manage a grimace through the pain. The fire on the pit still crackled, but the danger had passed. He dared to look down at the puppies. Their eyes were bright, fear slowly giving way to trust. They pressed closer to him, as if they understood what had just happened, that he had risked everything for them. One warrior whispered to another, almost reverently, "The human. He did not beg. He did not run. They are strong in ways we do not understand," the other replied. Curious. Evan's arm was useless. He could barely move his fingers. Skin hung in charred strips, black and red. Pain throbbed like a living thing. But despite it, he felt a sense of triumph unlike anything he had ever known. He had faced fire, fear, and death itself, and he had not failed. The puppies continued to nuzzle him, their small bodies clinging to his chest and arms. One even climbed onto his lap, curling around the stump of his burned hand. Evan laughed softly through the pain. "You little monsters," he said. "You're lucky I can't use this hand anymore, or I'd keep you from being so stubborn." Brax Thul studied him silently. There was no anger in the chief's eyes now, only respect. "Perhaps humans are not as weak as I believed," he said finally. "They fight with strength of heart, not muscle. That is admirable." Evan tried to answer, but could only cough and wince as the smoke burned his throat. The words didn't matter anyway. The message had been sent, louder than any shout could have been. A human would risk himself for the innocent. Even against fire, even against death, even in a world that did not care. The Krell warriors murmured among themselves. Some shook their heads, confused by the human's courage. Others looked thoughtful, almost ashamed. Their world was one of strength, power, and domination, but here, in the desert fire, a human had shown them something new, mercy that required greater courage than any weapon could wield. Evan looked down at the puppies again. Their tiny bodies were safe now. For the first time in what felt like hours, he allowed himself to feel hope. They would survive. They would grow. They would remember him. And perhaps in some strange way, he would live on in them. Even as the pain in his arm screamed for attention, the fire continued to burn, but Evan's heart felt strangely calm. He had paid a price, yes, but it was worth it. Every scar, every blister, every scream had meant life for those small creatures. And in a world so often ruled by cruelty, that fact made him feel invincible. Brax Thul turned and signaled to his warriors. "Leave them be," he commanded. "The human has spoken. Their lives are his to protect." Evan held the puppies tighter, feeling the rhythm of their tiny hearts against his own. In the middle of the desert night, surrounded by alien warriors and burning pits, he understood something clearly. Courage was not about fighting enemies. Courage was about protecting those who could not protect themselves, no matter the cost. And in that moment, every Krell there, warriors, hunters, and the chief himself learned something unforgettable about humans, that they could stand in fire and face death itself. All for the sake of the innocent. Evan closed his eyes, letting the smoke and pain wash over him. He had saved them. That was enough. And that was everything. Days passed, and Evan still could barely move his burned arm. The medics had stitched and wrapped what they could, but the damage was severe. Fingers were blackened, skin peeled and raw. Every time he tried to move, pain shot through him like fire. Most humans would have cursed their luck, blamed the world, or demanded rest. Evan did none of that. Beside him, the 6 alien puppies, no longer so helpless, stayed close. They nuzzled him, licked his wounds, and even tried to climb onto his lap, their small bodies pressing against him as if to say, "You saved us. We are yours now." He smiled weakly, tears threatening to fall. The warmth of their trust burned brighter than any fire he had faced. The Krell warriors came and went, curious but cautious. Some whispered to one another, still unable to understand why a human would risk so much for creatures that were not his own kind. Brax Thul watched from a distance, his massive form imposing even in the dim light of the recovery tent. He said little, but his eyes spoke volumes. There was respect there now, tinged with disbelief. One of the puppies whimpered and tried to crawl toward Evan's burned hand. He looked at it, blackened and useless, and winced. "Don't touch," he muttered, but even as he said it, he lifted the tiny creature and pressed it gently to his chest. The puppy nestled there, trusting completely. That small act of connection made Evan's heart swell. Every pain, every scream, every second spent in the fire, this moment made it worth it. The chief finally approached. His claws made soft thuds on the floor as he stopped just a few steps away from Evan. "You are weak," Brax Thul said, his deep voice carrying across the tent. Evan tried to smile. "I know," he whispered, "but—" The chief continued, "You are strong in ways few are. The Krell remember such things." Evan swallowed, his chest tight. He had expected anger, punishment, maybe even death. Respect had not occurred to him. Yet here it was, offered without words of praise, but in acknowledgement of the courage that had saved lives. The puppies shifted, sniffing and nudging him, their small bodies alive and vibrant now. One of them yipped softly, and Evan laughed, despite the pain that wrapped around him like a cage. "You little monsters," he said. "You're lucky I can't use this hand anymore, or I'd keep you from being so stubborn." The Krell watched quietly, their voices low. Even warriors hardened by decades of hunting and war could sense the bond forming between human and creatures. It was strange to them, almost alien in itself, a connection born of choice, not power, not dominance, not fear. Evan had chosen mercy over safety, and in doing so, had shown something the Krell had never seen. "You did not beg," one warrior murmured. "You did not run. Yet you risked yourself for them," another added. Brax Thul nodded slowly, his gaze still fixed on Evan and the puppies. "Strength is not always measured in weapons or battle," he said finally. "Sometimes it is measured in what one is willing to give up to protect the weak." Evan closed his eyes for a moment, letting the pain wash over him. His arm throbbed, blistered and scarred, but it was nothing compared to the relief, the joy, and the connection he felt. The puppies wriggled closer, their trust complete, their lives preserved because one human had refused to look away. The medics returned to check his wounds, but Evan barely noticed. His attention was entirely on the little creatures that now depended on him. He thought of the fire, the pit, the moment he had reached in despite the agony. That memory made the present burn a little less. Pain, he realized, could never outweigh the satisfaction of saving a life. For the first time in days, Evan felt hope. Not just for himself, but for the tiny beings that curled against him. He had faced death, fire, and the judgment of an alien species, and he had survived. They had survived. And in their survival, he found purpose stronger than fear, stronger than pain. Brax Thul turned and signaled the warriors to leave them be. "The human has spoken. Their lives are his to protect," he said, his voice carrying authority. Evan looked down at the puppies, his burned hand resting gently against their small heads. They licked his fingers, tiny, rough tongues that somehow healed more than the medics ever could. He smiled through the pain, finally understanding that some scars like the ones on his arm did not mark loss. They marked courage, survival, and the choice to act when it mattered most. In that moment, surrounded by smoke, sand, and the silent awe of alien warriors, Evan Holt felt something he had never felt before, the quiet, unshakable strength of a human who had chosen to save life, no matter the cost. And for the puppies in his arms, that was everything. Months passed, and Evan's burned arm slowly healed, though the scars remained as a permanent reminder of the fire. His hand no longer moved as it once did, but he had learned to adapt. Every morning, he woke to the soft sounds of the puppies, now growing fast, their blue skin still soft, their eyes bright with trust and curiosity. They had learned to follow him everywhere, their tiny bodies shadowing his every step. Evan watched them as they played in the desert, chasing each other in wild, clumsy circles. He laughed quietly, a sound that surprised even him. Each puppy carried the memory of that night, the fire, the pain, and the human who had risked everything to save them. That memory had bonded them to him in a way that went beyond instinct. They obeyed no one else fully. They trusted no one else completely. They were his in the way that only living beings bound by survival and love could be. The Krell continued to observe from afar. Some warriors still shook their heads at what they had seen. Others whispered among themselves about the strange human who had stared into fire without flinching. who had risked life and limb for creatures so small. The chief, Brax Tho, rarely spoke of it, but the respect in his eyes was undeniable. He even allowed Evan to move freely in certain parts of the territory, something no other human had ever been granted. Evan had found a rhythm with the puppies. They learned quickly, responding to his commands, imitating his gestures, and even seeming to understand his emotions. When he was quiet, they were quiet. When he laughed, they tumbled and rolled in the sand, sharing in his joy. And when he was hurt or tired, they pressed close to him, offering warmth and comfort as if they knew pain in their own way. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the desert in gold and orange, Evan sat with the puppies around him. Their bodies were now larger, stronger, but still gentle in his arms. He traced a finger along the scars of his burned hand and smiled wryly. "You little monsters," he whispered. "You've grown fast. You better not forget who saved you." The puppies nuzzled him, their eyes glowing softly in the dusk. They yipped and barked in their strange alien way, playful but reverent. Evan chuckled, feeling a swell of pride and love he had never known before. The bond between them was no longer just survival, it was family. The Krell occasionally tested them. Other hunters tried to approach, weapons ready, but the puppies stood their ground beside Evan. Their growls were deep and terrifying, yet measured. Evan had taught them not through fear, but through trust. They knew his voice, his gestures, and his intentions. They would fight if necessary, but they would never harm innocents. Evan remembered that first night, when he had reached into fire to save them. The memory burned in his mind as vividly as the fire itself. The pain in his arm had been severe, almost unbearable, but he had never hesitated. And now, seeing the puppies alive, strong, and loyal, he knew that the choice had been worth every moment. Sometimes, he wondered what the Krell thought as they watched. Did they understand the depth of human compassion? Did they see the courage it took to risk everything for life itself? Perhaps. Or perhaps it was a lesson the Krell would never fully comprehend. But Evan didn't care. He had his family now, and that was enough. The desert night was quiet, the only sounds the soft breathing of the puppies and the distant wind across the dunes. Evan lay back on the sand, the creatures nestled around him, their warmth comforting against the cool night air. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to rest, knowing that no fire, no enemy, no danger could take them from him. And as the stars emerged one by one in the vast, endless sky, Evan felt a deep, unwavering truth settle in his heart. Courage was not about weapons or strength. Courage was about love, sacrifice, and the choice to stand for life when no one else would. In the silence of the desert, surrounded by the creatures he had saved and the bonds he had forged, Evan Holt realized that he had become more than just a human. He had become a protector, a leader, and a father to beings who would follow him to the ends of the galaxy. And in their loyalty, he saw something extraordinary, a mirror of humanity's greatest power, the ability to choose compassion, even in the face of fire. Years passed, and the desert had changed. But Evan and the 6 alien creatures had grown stronger together. The puppies were no longer small. They were powerful, agile, and loyal, their blue skin marked with faint scars from their early days, a reminder of what they had survived. Yet despite their size, they still followed Evan as they once had, their trust unshakable, their bond unbreakable. The Krell had tested many things over the years: hunts, battles, and rival tribes, but Evan's creatures never faltered. When enemies approached, the 6 beasts charged with speed and precision, protecting him and the humans who traveled with him. Their loyalty was absolute. Where strength and weapons failed, their bond carried the day. And the Krell, who had once thought of humans as weak and fragile, began to see something entirely different. Evan himself had changed. The burn on his arm had left his hand partially useless, but he had adapted. Every movement, every action, Every choice he made was measured and precise. He no longer feared pain. He no longer hesitated. He carried the fire in his scars, but it had become a part of him, proof of the night he had chosen life over fear. Compassion over self-preservation. One night, during a patrol near the edge of Krell territory, a young Krell child approached him. Wide-eyed, she looked at the beast circling calmly around Evan and then at the human himself. "Human," she said softly, her voice trembling, "why did you put your hand in the fire?" Evan looked at her, and for a moment, the weight of years and memory pressed down on him. He traced the scars along his arm, the blackened, rough edges that told the story of courage and sacrifice. The smoke, the heat, the screams, they were all still there, living in the flesh of his body. Yet the memory no longer.